Here I am yet again. It's Andrew here. It's episode 82, and as I'm sitting here, it's a miserable kind of day. We're going to complete today our Beatitudes. There's theoretically two, but they both deal with the same theme, so I'm going to roll them together and allow us to move on to what comes next, which I'm looking forward to. So this is the last of the Beatitudes. It's Matthew chapter 5 verses 10 through to 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Well, I don't know how it strikes you, but the idea of being persecuted or feeling persecuted isn't really my idea of fun. I guess one of the things I grew up with was the idea that this was for people who were constantly in the business of seeking to evangelize, seeking to bring the gospel to people in whatever way they conceived it. But I want to suggest today that this isn't simply about being what we might call a Bible banger. I think it's much more about being a person of integrity. See, righteousness in the biblical sense is ultimately about doing the right thing. And this is a whole of life issue. It's not just about the religious bits of your life, the bits that you regard as morality. It's about the whole of life. And it's about, as I said, it's about responding with a sense of integrity to what we see going around about us, what we find ourselves encountering and engaging in the everyday. And it's political. It's unavoidable. You start to look at the prophets who are mentioned here, that they got hammered, they got persecuted because of righteousness, because they were committed to the right thing. And they were only too willing, well they weren't, they responded to the call of God to call out kings for their abuses. They called them out for their abuses in the worship sense of the things that they were doing, but they also called them out because they knew that that was the thin edge of the wedge, and they led to other things. And they would oppress people. They would oppress often the poor. And so you can see a lot in the prophetic books of the Old Testament that point to the political implications of what the prophets were doing and calling those in power to account for their injustice and calling them to actually behave in just ways. What we see here is that Jesus, throughout all these Beatitudes, is inviting us into a different kind of a world. It's a kingdom of heavenly rule kind of world. It's a kingdom where the values that actually underpin society are based on integrity. They're based on decency. They're based on a common concern of what's in the best interests of the whole. They are a departure from the me, grab kind of culture that we see so prevalent around us. It has struck me that as you'll be aware by now, that I follow American politics quite closely. And they talk about themselves as being the land of the free. And they are, but they don't care for their poor. It's the land of the free if you're rich. And it seems to me that, and I've made this comment, I don't know if I've made it on this before, but the the fact that the Americans would call the flagship of their naval fleet the USS Enterprise, and there's a new one coming down the pike, and this has been a consistent name. The USS Enterprise tells you everything you need to know about them and about what's important to them. And the problem with it is that it's the people at the bottom who miss out. Now, they're a religious society in many ways. They're a far more Christian nation than Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I live, where we live here. And yet, they regard us as socialists, by the way. I think they have no idea. And yet, there's a lot of people that miss out. And a lot of people that are always living on the edge. We have an underclass of our own where there's some justice issues we need to face. And hopefully we're working on that. But what we're seeing here, it seems to me, is that Jesus is inviting us into a different kind of world. And it's a world that where this desire to live in this way comes from the inside. It's in the heart. We had a foster son for a while. He's had a lot going for him. One of the issues we had early on was that he had trouble with the truth. and it was because of what had happened to him. It wasn't his fault. And because he discovered that if he could lie and get away with it, he was better off than if he told the truth and got often severely punished. And it took us a while to get through, but to recognise that actually in this household, telling the truth was regarded as being of great value. That in fact, if you stuffed up, you came clean about it, you told the truth, the punishment, if there was a punishment, was going to be a lot less than if you tried to cover it up and lie, if you tried to weasel out of it in some way. And I remember having this conversation with him sometime one day, and our eldest son Daniel said to me afterwards, he says, you know, because we've got 3 boys, he says, it would never have occurred to us not to tell the truth, because they knew that that's how it works. It's how it works in this household. And it seems to me there's a kind of kingdomish value here, and it's based on integrity. You know, we value integrity. Do we always get it right? Do I always get it right? Do I always tell the truth? Yeah, probably not. I'd like to believe that I do. But we always can twist things to suit our own ends and to put ourselves in a better light. That the values of honour, the values of compassion. I mean, to me, I think this is probably what I'd regard as the highest of human values, is the value of compassion. That they're all valued in this kingdom kind of a world. And I'm not sure that they are in the world that we live in today. And certainly not in the world that Jesus was living in. And where we seek the good of the whole rather than simply the good of the self. We're more interested in what's good for all of us, that we can all prosper, that we can all thrive, that we can all grow to be who God intends us to become. That we can all experience that fullness of life rather than it's just about me, grab, grab, grab. And so, this is what we're being invited into. Now, in my life, the decades I've lived, I've consistently found myself as the one who's out of step. You know the story, you know they're all out of step except my Johnny. Yeah, well, that's probably me. I can be the difficult one, I can be the one that has an alternative view, I can be the one that's ornery and can dig my toes in. It's not how I necessarily want to be, it just seems to be almost to be hardwired into me. And it doesn't always feel good. I have to say that. It doesn't feel good. I don't really enjoy it. I don't really enjoy feeling like I'm on the outside. Not that I always am. Sometimes people think, actually, he's got a point. Maybe not often, but it happens. And Jesus recognises that it's not fun. It's not fun being on the outside. It's not fun being one who others look at with a kind of quizzical look, and when you open your mouth they roll their eyes. It's not fun. But if it's about standing for integrity and truthfulness and values like what's in the best interests of all, sometimes it's a price that we have to pay. And yet Jesus is saying, you're blessed. I'm thinking, I don't feel particularly blessed. So he offers a corrective. He says, rejoice and be glad. It's a kind of form of behaviourism. You've got to say to yourself, actually, I don't feel particularly good right now. And I mean, I'm a wee bit in that space at the moment. This is stuff that's going down, and I'm a little bit finding myself at odds, but it's what it is. It's not surprising. Rejoice and be glad. There's a sense of saying, actually, the kingdom of heaven is ultimately made up of people, will be, people like you. People who are committed to living with a measure of integrity. And I'm not holding myself up as an example, because I also stuff things up. The reality is that we're so often prevented from doing the right thing by worrying what other people will think of us. It's been really true in my own life. Worrying about how others see me, about how others think about me. And it's easy to let that get in the way of us being true to ourselves. In the end, one of the things we need to recognise is that we play to an audience of one. Each of us do. We play to an audience of one. It's an audience that we don't see. And in fact, it's the only audience that matters. Having said that, I want to revise that. I think we play to an audience of two. There is the God who sees, the God who understands, the God who is always present with us. And there is also the witness of our own hearts. That's the thing that also tells us whether we are living with integrity, whether we are living with honour, whether we are living with grace and generosity. So I want to suggest that we're actually playing to an audience of two. And I'm not suggesting it's easy, because it isn't. Rejoice and be glad. God bless you.